Welcome, Mustangs, to this episode of the Red, Blue, and You podcast. Today, you'll hear from Assistant Provost for Undergraduate Education and Academic Success as we discuss the disability accommodations and success strategies. This episode focuses on questions that are important to SMU students and their families. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Alicia, and it's a pleasure to be here. Also, welcome to all our new Mustangs and their families.
So we'll get started focusing on questions students commonly have about DASS. Then we'll move into questions about the types of accommodations that DASS provides. So let's go ahead and get started. So what is Disability Accommodations and Success Strategies Office?
Yeah, sure. The Disability Accommodations and Success Strategies Office, or DASS, is SMU's official campus office that provides support and accommodations for students with disabilities. And Alicia, primary role of that office is to make sure students with disabilities can fully access the university's curriculum, programs, and all the activities that we have here on the Hilltop. The office does this by evaluating requests and authorizing reasonable accommodations under federal law. And this includes things like the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. But the DASS office also works collaboratively with students, faculty, and staff on implementation. And we also empower students to utilize all of the wonderful resources we have here at SMU. And we offer additional support like academic coaching and success strategies that come in formats of like a class, one-on-one coaching, and then also other types of group activities and support as well.
So I love hearing the fact that DASS provides students with the resources they need for them to feel empowered to be successful. So who is eligible to apply for accommodations or services at SMU?
Yeah, so eligibility for DASS services is based on a disability that significantly impacts a student's academic experience as defined by that federal disability law that I mentioned earlier. And this can include, but it's not limited to, like learning disabilities, physical disabilities, psychiatric conditions, or other documented health conditions that substantially limit a major life activity. So even students with temporary disabilities, like a broken leg, are eligible to apply for accommodations. Things like that, even temporary disabilities, are things the office can help with. So importantly, students must be a currently enrolled student at SMU and committed to attending, including paying any of the required deposits. So really, DASS starts working with you at the point of deposit.
That's great to hear. That's great for students and families to hear. So for example, if I'm a student at SMU, how do I apply for accommodations?
Yeah, so to begin the process, students must complete and submit what we call an online accommodation request form. And this is found on the DASS website, which is located at smu.edu/DASS. So again, smu.edu/DASS. So along with that form, students upload things like supporting documentation, and that does vary by the type of disability that a student has. And we ask them to describe how it affects your academic functioning. And you have to understand too, like the K-12 environment is very different than the college one. And so we also want you to start thinking about how does your accommodation might need to look different from K-12 environment to that of college. So we also request that documentation is current. So please consult our documentation guidelines on the website. So at SMU, disability-related records are not shared with anyone beyond that of your accommodations coordinator. So the things that you might have provided to admissions during your time of application don't automatically get forwarded to the DASS office. And so it's important that you understand that this is a separate process that you have to start after you pay your deposit. And then after that, the DASS team is forward-looking. So we start looking at your accommodation, help you approve those accommodations, because unfortunately they're not retroactive. So starting early, and especially for incoming students, is really key.
So if I'm understanding, students have to make sure that they are working directly with the DASS office to ensure that their accommodations are going to be met once they come to SMU.
That's totally correct. Yep.
So my next question is, what are the types of accommodations an undergraduate student may receive?
Yeah, so accommodations, as you might imagine, because disabilities look and manifest a little differently for each individual student, those accommodations are individually determined based on each of the students' provided documentation needs. And we also take into account like what type of degree you're pursuing and how that might be or look a little bit different in each of our curricula. So really, we're focused on providing equal access rather than guaranteeing some sort of academic success. So SMU's DASS team considers the impact of that disability and the reasonableness of the requested accommodation. And so some of those commonly requested supports can include, but of course are not limited to, things like the testing accommodations, such as extended time or a separate testing environment that's a little more distraction-free. assistive technology or software. Sometimes we made accommodations related to adjustments for injuries that are affecting writing or typing. And then, of course, service animal approvals, including our housing consideration for those students that might be living on campus. So keep in mind, each accommodation is tailored to the student's functional needs and documentation. Additionally, DASS offers success strategies like academic coaching, skill building, and peer support from students with ADHD, learning differences, or students on the autism spectrum. So, all in all, DASS is part of this broader approach to help students thrive here academically at SMU.
So let's move into some tips and tricks. So, are there any tips or tricks students and families should know to make the process a bit easier?
Really, time is your best friend. So, first, starting that process early really does reduce the stress for individual students and their families. But here are some other practical tips that really help students. As I mentioned, starting early is the biggest one. So, submit those requests and documentation well before classes begin, especially if you need accommodations related to residence life and student housing or complex academic adjustments. Also, submitting your documentation yourself is really important because SMU requires disability documentation to be sent directly to DASS. So, again, we're not sharing information between offices like admission or another place that you might have disclosed your disability status to. So, once submitted, we really encourage you check that SMU email, even if it is over the summer before you arrive at SMU, because that's where we're communicating with you about the status of your application and next steps that you might need to take. After that, initial review, you'll be asked to sign up for an intake meeting with one of our DASC accommodations coordinators, and they're a really great team. So be on the lookout for them and schedule a time that's convenient for you. And be proactive in your communication is probably another practical point that I'd like to make. Once accommodations are approved, students should access the DASS link, which is kind of our login portal where you can request those accommodation letters be sent each semester to your instructors. Because as you might imagine, you have different instructors each semester, and it's important to communicate with them about how your accommodation might impact their class, your class and their learning environment. And then lastly, as opposed to K-12, you as the student, you lead the process. So while families can support and encourage you to take part of our process, the student is really the one who must initiate and manage those accommodation requests.
I love that. Students must lead the process. So, my last question is, how would a student or guardian contact the DASS office for more information?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, for students with an approved accommodation, the best way to access things is actually through that DASS link portal. So that's where in place you log in and you can communicate directly with your accommodations coordinator and see all those letters and kind of the documentation that you've been working on together. But if you're not approved yet for official accommodation, I encourage you to just visit the DASS website at smu.edu/DASS, and you can contact an individual accommodations coordinator from our staff list or just contact the DASS general line. Any of those is definitely a good place to start.
Awesome. Thank you, parents, guardians, and students for listening to this episode of the Red, Blue, and You podcast. And thank you, Dustin, for including such useful information about DASS. Catch us on our next episode of the Red, Blue, and You podcast. Go Mustangs.